You're listening to Tehachapod with Keybudge, Corey Costello, and Greg Garrett.
Tehachapod time once again. Corey Costello, Keybudge with you today. Corey, how you doing?
Good.
It's good to have you.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be back. I was just telling you I'm a little tired this afternoon.
I was
don't
going
know
to say,
why.
you're dragging.
I have no idea why. I'm sorry. I will make it through this one.
You're going to pick it up. You know why?
Pick it up.
Because our guest brought the energy.
I think so.
Today, we are honored to have Nick Tanaka from the Loop community newspaper. Yeah, you're a reporter over there, but you're doing something kind of cool.
Yeah. He's the host of the second best podcast in Tehachapi. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
We're ranking number 2, solidly at number 2. I love it.
Charting in on the Tehachapi Hot 100 or the Hot 2.
Right.
Yeah, that's what our chart is, the Hot 2.
Hot is one of the 93561 zip code.
So we're going to be fighting over the number 1 spot for podcast downloads. If you don't know, tell us what happened. Claudia all of a sudden says, we need to do a podcast. Where did it come from?
Gotcha. So to go back a couple of years, right? So a couple of years ago, I moved back to town. I went to middle school and high school here. I, as it turns out, really like it in Tehachapi. And what I was doing was a lot of kind of on the edge kind of media. So one of the things we do is digital signage, and I brought that to Claudia, and she had mentioned at one point as we were starting up the digital signage, someone had mentioned to me that I should do a podcast. I don't remember who it was, but someone mentioned to me that we should do a podcast.
Probably in this room.
Yeah, probably in this
somewhere
room.
in this room.
Let me see. And I think they're speaking right now. I did pitch it to her.
And she talked about that like almost every week for like a month and a half. And I was like, you know what?
She was dropping you hints.
I think she's dropping me hints because I had done a podcast previous to this. The podcast that I had worked on before this was Inside Skunk Works, which is a kind of documentary series about how the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works works.
Cool.
You know, works.
Yeah.
And we got to interview a bunch of really interesting engineers and designers who are kind of at the edge of their craft, like really, really doing a great job and are on the cutting edge. So it's really cool to like ping them and see like, okay, I know you're not allowed to talk about a lot, but what are you allowed to talk about? Oh my gosh, they have great stories. So she knew that I had worked on that podcast and she was like, oh, well, maybe we could do something. So finally I was like, okay, I'm going to commandeer a closet. So in the Loop newspaper, cause all of the buildings downtown, a lot of the buildings, they're stone. So it kind of echoes in a lot of the buildings and it echoes in there, but I found a closet. So I put up blue moving tarps, like you buy at
the furniture blankets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I got furniture blankets, put them on all of the walls so it really isolates the sound. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to read the newspaper, hand it to her, and see what she thinks. And she loved it. She was like, yes, this is exactly what we're supposed to do. I still can't remember that guy who told me that we should do it. But whoever that guy was, he was right. We should do it. and then we did redo that episode. I commissioned one of the guys that I work with a lot, Isaac Hernandez, to do the theme song of the podcast because I've listened to a lot of his other stuff. He's really good at doing like scores and doing like instrumentals for like commercials and stuff. We've used him for that, so I was like, okay, I gotta call my guy, hit him up. And I was like, oh hey, I need like maybe like a 2-minute song, and I need it by like the end of the month. And he's like, oh okay, yeah. And I was like, how much is it gonna cost? And he goes, I don't know, like $25. And I was like, okay, how about $100?
Yeah.
Like sell yourself a little better than that, bud. And that's how we got the theme song for the podcast was, this guy that I've worked with a bunch.
Wow.
Love it. Now, you talk about putting moving blankets up on the walls. Corey, I didn't have to look at him. I know you and I are having flashbacks about working in mom and pop radio back in the day, and we've been there.
I mean, mom and pop, like, even when I was working at CSUB, our first podcast, I used to brag, it went from basically we were in an office trailer. So at one point when I started there, I was in a trailer. And that's how people would come to my office and they'd sit at my desk. Like we kind of started Tehachapod in Key's office, just at a desk. And we would record. And then by the time that show ended, we were actually a digital television show. And so I would tell people like, hey, we went from the trailer park to like, the penthouse. But yeah, no, there's been plenty of setups where, Yeah, it's been closets. Closets always seem to be a popular destination to find good sound acoustics. And, we're still trying to get our sound acoustics around here because we're so close to F Street. But it's actually kind of good. We get the sounds of Tehachapi in the background.
Yeah.
I think we should make this a full-length window, Key. And it's like a window on the World Studio. People could look right in when we're doing the podcast, But, yeah, no, that's the beauty of audio is you can just try to find something that works and just... closet, bank vault, whatever.
It doesn't need to look good.
Right.
It needs to sound good.
Right.
That's it.
Exactly. And we've talked about incorporating video, but it's time management, and we're not there yet. With audio, it's a lot easier than dealing with the video. So, and face for radio, you hear that. I'm pretty comfortable with that.
I get that all the time.
So having a face for radio, I'm not too worried about bringing the video aspect in. Before we even started recording, we started talking about different microphones and how we were evolving and how the things that you're talking about. I go, Corey, we've been there. Yeah. Okay, we've been there. We've used that mic. Yeah, we still have that mic.
Yeah.
But those are the little things, little trade geek things that we've been talking about.
And that's the beauty of podcasts, though, is you can literally start. I mean, we've talked about it. We've had a few studio upgrades since, but we started with just mishmash equipment that Key and I owned over the years. And so you want to talk about just random setups. It's like you had to make it happen. And so you're doing whatever adapters and couplers you need to make things. So we had a bunch of that stuff and we threw it on the table and we just started plugging things in until it didn't buzz or hum. And we said, okay, we got it. Let's start. And that's how it started. So.
Yeah.
So you pitch the idea, or the idea gets pitched to you.
Yeah.
You come back with a demo, and Claudia, owner of the Community Loop newspaper, says, yes. Okay. Now where does it evolve?
So what we're wanting, or what I'm wanting to do right now, we're in the kind of stub our toe on everything process.
Sure.
Right? I want to make as many mistakes as physically possible, as quickly as possible, so I know what to do and what not to do. Right? So the next thing that I am going to be working on with them is actually making a visual accompaniment with the audio that we're generating from the podcast. What I want to be able to do is, and you and I had talked about this previously outside of the podcast, but creating visuals that can go onto social media and be shared in ways that, people are sharing things. One thing I say, or one of the things that, I kind of did have to do a little bit of sales for the podcast. And when I was talking to Claudia, I was, I did a bunch of research about, podcasting audiences and newspaper audiences and social media audiences, and how they're different and how they're similar. Podcasting audiences are generally millennial, young Gen X. That's a large portion of the audience. Newspaper is 53% boomers and above. And then social media is very heavy on the Gen Z and millennial side. So you kind of have to talk to everyone in their language, right? Their medium. And that's kind of like you can do the best podcast in the world, but someone in Gen Z is just not going to listen to it because that's just not part of their everyday routine. You kind of have to talk to them in their language, which is getting the things onto TikTok or onto Instagram Reels. And that's kind of like the next step. The next step is getting into that realm so that we can then talk to, the kids that are just coming out of THS.
And that's where the video comes in, because the video for any podcast is not so much someone's going to sit there and watch. I mean, I used to always say that when they used to have radio shows on TV, when Howard Stern was on the E! Network or Don Imus was on MSNBC. I said, who wants to watch me do radio?
Right.
And they tried that locally in my radio stations. We're going to put cameras in your shoe. We're like, why? Who wants to watch us do radio? But what we see now with social media is you take those clips of the podcast and you turn those into little bit reels, and they're teases for the entire episode. So you're going to reach somebody and they'll think that's funny, and then they might get the entire episode or whatever it's going to be. So yeah, it's more of an accompaniment, not really a way to consume the entire show.
Absolutely. It's that hook. It's the hook with the bait, with the little wriggler as you're out in the Cardin River. That's what the social media is supposed to be in order to hook them into the rest of the information that you want to impart upon them, which is the next step.
So in our first few debut episodes of In the Loop podcast, you've got a partner that works with you.
Yes. So I work with Josh Crisalli, who is kind of a name in town. The Crisallis.
I worked for his dad at the Tehachapi News when I was in high school.
Yeah. His family's been around a long time. Him and his sister both work at the Tehachapi Loop now. I think his grandfather was even here for, he did some work in town too. I wouldn't be able to speak on authority exactly what his grandfather did, but he's lived here for a large portion of his life. He knows a lot about town. So, I've only been here like maybe a decade. So, I could be like, oh yeah, I know all of these things about town. And he's like, no. I know a thing or two. Like he's not John Hammond levels of information about Tehachapi, right. But he's on the spectrum there. So, and it's a really nice resource to have.
And you guys work as a 2-man team newscast.
Yeah.
And is that the format you guys are going to stick with for now? Or do you see that evolving and doing some feature interviews and things like that?
So right now, like you said, it's kind of call and response. We alternate the various segments. But we recently did an interview with Sarah Rose over at the Healthy Hippie, and we're planning on doing a lot more interviews. And I'm also kind of pushing Claudia to cover a few extra stories here and there that I find like rather interesting that scratch the back of my head. One of the big ones being, various, because right now the market's doing a lot of kind of weird and interesting things. It'd be really nice to do interviews with the people that we do business with that are kind of relevant to that world. So the kind of like financial advisors like Cisco, that's just down the street from us, or maybe like Alicia Bowles or something, just kind of to get more information and a greater diversity of voices. Because that's one thing that I really like about my favorite Tehachapi podcast is that there's a really big diversity of voices that come into this room, right? You guys,
this room. I thought he had another show in mind because I certainly would.
There's a third podcast.
No, I certainly would. When he said favorite, I'm like, not us, but continue.
But yeah, on that note, yes, continue.
But no, yeah, like I love that you guys have a ton of different people come in and they all sound very different. That's one thing that I found in like the podcasts that I listen to. I really like podcasts that, have a host or two, but I like it when they bring more people on and talk to a bunch of people and I can hear the voices of people that I'm probably not going to meet on my day to day, right? And that's kind of lovely. I like that.
And that's, Corey and I talk about how terrestrial radio has to evolve and what they've done is they've incorporated podcasting into terrestrial radio. But what we do is we don't have the being confined to fill a format, to run a commercial and hit a spot break. Yeah. And we're timing everything. We can have a free flow conversation and wherever it goes. I mean, when you look at like, if you've ever listened to the Joe Rogan podcast, it could go anywhere from an hour to 3.5, 4 hours,
right?
Because the conversation dictates what happens. And that's what we try to do here in this room, have a conversation. And a lot of times here at this table, there'll be one open chair. And we look at that as the community, the listener, and they're sitting right there listening, and we have to be their voice, ask the questions for them. And it's a little different in radio when you talk radio.
Yeah, when you're doing an interview and you've got to hit your spot break at 15, 30, 45 after the hour, you have people going in and out of a car and they're grabbing your show at any point, so you always got to continue to reintroduce your guest, reintroduce your guest. We don't have to reintroduce Nick. Everybody knows he's here because that's why they download the show,
right?
And so it's a little bit different. And we would sometimes blow through breaks and stuff like that in order to continue a great show. And then the producer would and I was on the producer side too. You would panic because you're like, I've got 14 minutes worth of spots to make up, and we got 10 minutes left in the hour. And then the salespeople are looking in the window and banging on your studio door like, the flower shop spot didn't run and that kind of stuff. So much easier to just be able to hit record and just start talking to people.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
Well, I love to hear that feedback that you're the demographic we want to reach. Okay, so one of the goals that we've had here and that I've talked with Greg is that we want to get younger and bring people along with the journey here at the city of Tehachapi, so they start to understand government, understand the different departments and things that we're involved in, and the people that are making things happen. And if we start talking to a younger audience the way you want to be talked to, like you said, then we're going to keep you longer versus just waiting for the newspaper to put an article in. And like you said, it's a different demographic. We're reaching an older demo, and we want to talk to the entire pie, if you will, of demographics and not just isolate to, well, this is the way government's always done it. We send out a press release or we wait for a phone call. Yeah, it's like, no, there's too many avenues, too many things that we can do to talk about and be transparent.
There's also expanding upon, I think with the newspaper level, you have content that comes in on every other week basis in the case of the loop. And so, but you're still confined to 1,000 words, 1,200 words, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But you do have that ability then to expand upon that story. And I think there's been some of the larger newspapers in New York Times and stuff like that have been successful in some of the podcasting stuff. What they do is they just expand upon what was in the print version.
Yeah.
And so that's a great opportunity to then just give more of the story, because that's what the podcast is a long form conversation. You can do an entire hour on one topic and one story. And so that's the beauty, I think, with what you guys have, is you have the content coming in the door already.
Yeah.
And you have the ability to pretty much just expand upon whatever you choose.
The other thing that I really like about podcasting is that you guys are comms majors. When we speak, we convey an emotion. When you write, it is much harder.
It's different.
It's very different. And not only that, like we've been talking this whole episode, different generations talk differently and convey information and receive information differently. And it's way harder to do as text.
That's part of the problem with our society in general. We've gotten so comfortable using text message and email to get our points across that people the messages get misconstrued, because there's no tone to email. I have to remind people all the time. There's no tone to a text message. Like, you can put an emoji on there to clear it up to make sure you're joking, but that's about it. You can't. And so that's been a lot of things, society's disagreements, is the fact that they're trying to use the written word and not so much the spoken word anymore. So again, that's the beauty of this medium.
Yeah. And you just hit the nail on the head. It's really about like making sure that the context of what I'm saying is really actually conveyed. And you get that a lot more in podcasts. I mean, I don't know what podcast you guys are listening to, but back like 10 years ago almost. Actually, almost exactly 10 years ago, I started listening to the Welcome to Night Vale podcast. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. So Welcome to Night Vale is about a community radio station in a desert community where there are weird red lights on the hills and there are a bunch of spooky happenings happening.
Nice.
But the host is just super happy-go-lucky and nothing can ever be wrong. And this guy's just reporting on like, oh, the sky is now purple. All right, and your community calendar this week. And he's just got a really good attitude. And I thought it was really funny because I was like, I live in a desert community with red lights on the hills. So I've been listening to them for about a decade, and I love their style of, and their stuff is more narrative. It's not really actually news, it's all just like one big story.
Yeah.
But I've been listening to podcasts for so long, and I just find the medium just super interesting, and all of the weird things that you can do in the medium of podcasting that you might not have thought of, right? Like, you could do entire movies just completely in audio, and they're just as compelling.
So I really got exposed to this medium in 2004, and it really started. And that was the reason why it was called podcast, was because iPod was the only version.
Yeah.
And I had a radio show, and it was focused on motorsports. It was a weekend show, and I had a listener who called me and said, "You should do a podcast with this show." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He was a computer programmer, and so he had all the tech stuff, and he said, "It's basically just think about recording a nonstop 1 hour talk show, and then I'll handle the rest, and we'll focus on NASCAR." And that's what we did for a good 3 years. We did this NASCAR podcast, one of the first out in the market.
Wow.
And I had another friend at the time, though, who was working with the radio station. To your point about movies, he actually did a satire podcast where he created a talk radio station. So what he did, think about it, was almost like The Office. So he took things from around our station, the happenings, and turned them into basically a play. And it was called Hudson and Gaines, and it was about, he made up this radio station back east, and their tagline, I think they did like old school funk and Bush Pilots baseball. That was what, like, they made up and the guy, him and his friends did all the voices of the different hosts. And they would talk community calendar stuff. And we had a consultant come to the radio station one time and tell us we had to do things a certain way. Well, we had a podcast about these guys we got to do traffic and news on the 8s. Traffic and news. And anyway, it was hilarious. It went on for like 2-3 years. The production was so intensive, he had to quit doing it. But it was hysterical. And he did a full-on recreation of a radio station and kind of making fun of what was happening in our work environment on a podcast.
I love that so much. Okay,
it would have been a great TV show. It's probably still out there. You can probably check it out.
Okay, I am going to check
we even had to reformat our studio. It was getting rewired, and so we needed to program something overnight. We couldn't program it from the studio. We had to do it from the tower site. And I told the program director, I said, how many hours do we need? He said, we need like 10 hours of programming. I said, you think we could get away with running 12 hours of Hudson and Gaines? And we asked the guy who ran the show. He goes, absolutely. And so we uploaded his show, and we ran his podcast on the air, this fake radio station, for 12 hours while our studio got rewired. It was brilliant programming.
Love that. That's so cool. But that's the beauty of podcasting. It bleeds over, and we see it go both ways. Someone asked me when they saw the In the Loop, well, how do you feel about, the Loop newspaper's got a podcast? I go, I love it. This is fantastic, because it gives the audience, the Tehachapi audience that likes podcasts, additional sources to stay local.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we're not the first ones. I know that Steve Lee had Tehachapi Mountain Voice that he recorded for years.
Yeah.
And he produced several other shows. There was a tech show and the Pink Flamingo RV. And there was a whole series of podcasts that Steve did here in Tehachapi. Church of the Nazarene has a podcast. Mm-hmm. So we're not the new, we're kind of like the latest kids on the block. Yeah. And, welcome to the bus of podcasting here in Tehachapi, because there are others that have kind of laid the groundwork for us in this region. But we kind of get, we've been very fortunate being at the city. So we get opportunities to talk to a lot of people about a lot of subjects. And then we do a lot of push out to the media to get this information out there. So, the Loop newspaper has been one of those that's been so kind to carry these episodic, journals that I send out to tease the show. And I'm super happy that we've got another podcast in town.
Yeah, it's exactly where everybody has a podcast now. It seems like most of the guests on a podcast have their own podcasts. You listen to some of the top podcasts in the world, comedians, actors. I mean, I even saw something the other day that said you can't have a really hit television show now unless that hit television show has a podcast.
Yeah.
If you like watching Yellowstone, there are 4 or 5 Yellowstone podcasts out there, one being official, created by the Paramount Network to talk just about Yellowstone, or go down the list. They do podcasts now. So it's certainly part of everybody's media folder. And the more people that are talking on this and being able to discuss and communicate is really the future of media. And I think podcasts, like I said, they've been around since the early 2000s. Just took a little while for them to catch on. But I think the ability with all these different services, smartphones, all that stuff, we're finally there.
Oh yeah, and we are in the perfect spot for podcasts, like geographically, because a lot of people out here, they either work out at the prison. Okay, that's a 20-minute drive. Or they work out at Edwards. Oh, that's an hour drive. Or Lancaster Palmdale, or China Lake. That could be an hour and a half. Yeah. They're gonna listen to something, and there's not a lot of radio out there.
That's all I did when I commuted for 9 months before I started working here. Was I would load podcasts on my phone up and down to Bakersfield. That's the way. I did not listen to and I'm a terrestrial radio guy. I didn't listen to terrestrial radio.
That's one of the things that we identified was the commuter workforce.
Oh, yeah.
And our goal with this podcast is to try and keep it in that 30-minute range or less, so that way we're within the drive time. So that way they can digest an entire episode in one commute, and not have to come back 2 and 3 times, to finish up the conversation. So that's been our goal. Now with what you guys are doing, you guys are hitting it about 10 minutes. Is that what the early?
That's my goal right now. Okay. My goal is to get everything in and around the 10-minute range. The podcast that I'm kind of modeling after is Up First, which is just like original fact-finding NPR. That's it. Like, all they do is say, hey, this thing happened and this thing happened, and that's the show. Like, that's really the thing that they do. But I kind of want to make it a little more fun, because Tehachapi is more fun than the rest of the world. So what I want to do is I want to, kind of push it just a little bit. But yeah, in and around the 10-minute mark is kind of where I'm trying to float. And that also kind of helps me with the amount of time that I spend in post and in pre-production. Because like when the stories come in, they don't always, like, you can't just read them. It doesn't flow right. So you do have to rewrite that. And then, you also don't want to make it so that it's so long that it feels like intimidating, because some people get intimidated when
it's an audiobook.
Yeah, it becomes an audiobook, and they're like, oh man, I only got to go to the grocery store, so I'm trying to fit in kind of the 10-minute range, and that also helps me with
you brought up NPR. I was never an NPR listener to the actual radio side, but they've done a very good job in the podcast world. They're heavily produced.
Oh my gosh.
I
do
wish,
a fantastic job on production.
I wish, I had the time that they do and the staff to pull it off. They do a great job producing. They do we're going to cover a story, but we're going to bring in these sound bites, and all of a sudden the voice changes and it's a source, and then they will then credit the source after they're done. Anyway, very well done. I'm not an NPR person, again, on the terrestrial radio side, but some of the podcasts they've done are very good because of their production value, and then there's their ability to dive deep into the story.
Oh yeah. And then there's also, and then on the terrestrial radio side, I also grew up on Prairie Home Companion. I don't know if you guys have listened to Prairie Home Companion. It's a really long running show, which, I think his name was Garrison Keller or something like that.
Right.
He did this whole show, and it was very, very campy, very, very campy. But that's what I listened to on my way to elementary school because my dad was a huge fan of it, and I didn't get it. I didn't get it at all. But it was something that was really formative, and I really wish that there was more public access to media in like local areas, right? I really like local media. I love that, for instance, and you guys are especially good in this way. Like, you guys are a very innovative group at the city. Like, you guys come up with stuff all the time that is like the coolest thing I've ever heard of. Like, you guys have my dream job. But like, that's the sort of stuff that I feel like people should really appreciate more. So like, I talk about you guys a lot.
Oh, we appreciate that.
When I'm walking around, I tell people to check you guys out like all the time.
Well, we appreciate that. And likewise, we want people to subscribe to your show as well. I mean, it is a newscast. I mean, it is relevant information. You've got, news and weather. Mm-hmm. You're talking to interesting people in the community, and you and Josh go back and forth. You share the limelight. You produce it well because it's produced differently than what we do. But I like that, and I love the fact that it's its own unique. It stands on its own. So, and you guys are just a few episodes in. What are you guys up to? Like 4 or 5 so far when we're recording?
We're 4 when we're recording. 5 will be the 4th of July. So perfect. So that's going to be a fun one.
Cool. Good. So, and it'll be great if you haven't found it yet. What platforms are you on?
We're on, so as it stands right now, we're basically on everything, Spotify, all of them, except for Apple Music, because they're being mean.
They haven't approved it yet. It takes a while. Apple's very selective, and then all of a sudden, they're the first to download.
Yeah.
So it'll happen, but they get very selective, and they check out each episode. Are you consistent? Is it going to be there? Are you producing enough content to warrant being on our platform?
Yeah.
So,
and that's the thing we're running. And we ran into that for the other podcast too, where like, you'd think like, oh, a big name like Lockheed Martin, they'll get the first episode. Nope. They were like, no, we don't know about this. We're like, are you sure?
Wow.
Right.
But yeah, it is what it is.
Well, that's super cool.
Yeah, that's the beauty of being able to, whether you have a very highly produced show, or because with things like radio, it was pretty much standard. You had intros, outros, this and that, rejoins. Production was a big part of it. Mm-hmm. Podcasts can be heavily produced. They can be very basic. You just turn a microphone and start talking. It's about the content. And I think people have realized that the bells and whistles sometimes don't matter unless it really fits into the show. And so that gets more access to that public media, as you were talking about, because anybody can do it.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody can now have just being back at the NAB conference a couple months ago, anybody can have their own television station now. I mean, you can start a digital television station with, a few $1,000s, and it's not hard to do anymore. You don't need transmitters and satellites and all that stuff. So there is more and more access to public media.
Now, are we going to have a segment that features Claudia or Pat?
Yes. So
okay,
okay. We have finally bullied Claudia enough. She's like, you know what? Yeah, I think I could be on the podcast.
Good.
So I'm really hoping she's not going to be in the 5th episode. I'm hoping I can get her for the 6th episode. That's my hope. But I want her to be more of a voice because she has an interesting voice and she's been here a really long time. She knows the community really well. So like, I want to be able to tap into that a lot for upcoming episodes.
I would I would really love to hear you guys be the reporter on the street and go out to the farmer's market and talk to some folks or something like that.
You're giving me homework now.
I am.
He's producing your show.
Well, we did it last year. We went out.
we
We
did.
just kind of did a couple quick interviews. It gets time restrictive for some of the things that we do. So it's like, we look on the time management.
Yeah.
But I can see, what better tie-in than you interview some folks and you tell them, hey, you're going to be on the In the Loop podcast to grow your audience.
Oh yeah, and if they're at our farmers market, they're semi-relevant to Tehachapi.
Yeah.
They might not. I mean, like we pull a lot from Santa Clarita, like a lot, like more than you'd think. You're the one that told me that actually.
Yeah.
But they care about the area. Like I've actually been in Lancaster and come across people who are from Santa Clarita, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're from Tehachapi? We go there like every summer." I'm, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So like people outside of Tehachapi do also care about what happens up here. So
Yeah, and I got done, I think it was last week before, spoke to the Bakersfield Area Association of Realtors, their commercial investment forum. And I had a few people come up afterwards, first of all, complimenting, what Key does on social media. I love your guys' Instagram. I know exactly what's happening in Tehachapi. I listen to the podcast because I just want to know what's going on. I live down here, but we visit up often. And so I feel like I can listen to the podcast and know what's happening and that sort of stuff. So it is getting noticed outside the area, sort of just a resource for people to either know what's going on or just get more information about a story.
yeah.
Yeah, I was recently asked to do the My Two Cents podcast. It's out of Bakersfield to talk about Tehachapi because they heard about the podcast and the things that we were doing. It's like, okay, this is different for a government to be talking all the time about the things that are going on, not only in their community, but what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I spent 30 minutes down there talking to the hosts, and we talked all Tehachapi, and we talked about, the goal of transparency. But we also want to make sure that we're not just talking government every time. We want it to be of interest.
I'll tell you, we were trying to take this. I mean, I tried taking this podcast and use it. There's an organization called the League of California Cities, and it's basically it's like a conference we share resources. All the cities in California obviously are part of it, and there's whether it's resources or whether it's just best practices. It's just kind of a government group, and they have an annual conference, and they were asking for submissions, and I basically submitted a podcast panel. Like, well, we can tell people how to do a podcast. And they didn't pick that as a segment or because none of the people were doing it. It wasn't, It wouldn't have applied to enough people, they said, because there's so few cities, and most cities are like, no chance, we would never trust our people to do a podcast. So it was kind of like, well, it's not really relevant enough this year, maybe next year.
Oh my God. But that's government thinking.
Yeah, it is.
We're reactionary versus being proactive. We try to be proactive here with that attitude of like, how can we do more to get information out and educate our community?
Right.
Here it's like, we're not ready to do that yet.
Yeah, until the city of San Diego has it, we're not going to do it. That kind of stuff.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
No, you guys, don't let them get you down.
Plus, there is a little bit of like, well, we don't want that tiny town of 10,000 people to tell the League of California Cities how they should be doing their media. And I've ran into this before. I ran into this with even in like the college athletics marketing days too. Same thing. They're like, well, yeah, you guys are doing really good things at Cal State Bakersfield, but like we can't have you doing stuff and telling Oregon State how to do it, and they've got a budget 15 times what you have. So sometimes innovation doesn't get rewarded to the little guy because they're like, yeah, great idea, but we don't want you on stage telling the bigger folks how to do their business. It's understandable.
Well, I for one am very happy that you guys are on the cutting edge of this. Yeah. I love how transparent that our government is in this town.
Well, thank you for that. That's the goal.
Yeah.
And it's working with our media partners like yourself, working with Tehachapi News, working with the Bakersfield TV stations, radio stations, sharing information in different ways, using our social media platforms to get the information out. And I know it used to be, when I came on, we would send a press release was a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to send a press release out to the Tehachapi News or the Loop.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're done. It's like, no, there's so much more we can do.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like we were trying to upstage the newspaper, but it was like we knew there was a percentage of the audience, the community that digested the information that way. That's like the digital brand that you have.
Yeah.
There's a different audience and demographic for that. So now you're reaching even more people. So, I mean, and I'm super happy that Claudia has recognized that it's giving you guys the opportunity to go run with this.
Oh yeah.
So we want to see the success with it, and there's no doubt that people are going to pick it up and subscribe. So have you guys, got any feedback, so far?
We have.
Okay.
We've gotten a fair amount of really positive feedback from the community. There was one thing I mispronounced the name of an advertiser, which is the worst.
That's a radio sin right there.
So I got into a little bit of trouble for that one. But other than that, she was like, I really like the podcast, but you should probably say our company name correctly.
Yeah, it happens when I was working in radio. You would bring in news reporters from different. They just moved to Bakersfield, right? And they had no idea. And Bakersfield's a tough area because there's a lot of, for example, the city of Delano, right? Everywhere else in the world, it's Delano, right? After like the president, and so Delano would throw people off. We had a guy one time doing weekend news, and he pronounced it T. John Ranch. I literally thought the program director was going to run through the wall. And he, if you ever have a question about how to pronounce something, you ask.
There was no question. That's how you pronounce it.
We had a news reporter trying to talk about Decatur Street in, I think, Oildale, and she pronounced it a Decatur. And we're like, this isn't Oildale, right? Decatur. But she came from a affluent area, and that's just how it was pronounced there. And so anyway, it happens. Don't worry.
I did that at KUZZ a couple of times when I was doing the news, and I mispronounced something, and my cell phone all of a sudden lights up. It's the news director. Call me on the pronunciation of this. And, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I live here, but I'm not living down in Bakersfield.
Right,
so it was like, the local's going to school you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
well, this is exciting stuff. So we want to encourage people, our listeners, to also embrace In the Loop podcast. Right now it's a weekly. Is it going to stay a weekly?
It's going to stay a weekly. Yeah.
And
we might end up doing like a one-off episode here and there in the future. But we're going to try to keep it Mondays, 6:00 every Monday. Always at 6:00. That's what
program release 6 a.m. or 6 p.m.
a.m.
6 a.m. release every Monday.
That's the goal.
Okay, I know our goal was once a week. And it's changed because information comes in or the guest becomes available, or now that we've kind of done multiple formats where we do this like this extended version conversation, or we do the mini podcast and try and do it in less than 15 minutes, where I just do it myself. It's I don't know. Sometimes we're producing 2 and 3 shows a week because the information's there.
Or a day.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's 2 or 3 shows a day, and then we just hold on to it and put them out, in the week after.
Yeah. So we're letting the data, the news, the information that needs to get out dictate how we release and produce shows.
Yeah.
So it's growing, and I think we're up to about 160 episodes in just under 3 years. So
and what did we just hit?
Over 50,000 downloads.
I saw that.
There you go.
I saw the press release.
But are you guys going to run it or talk about it? Is it going to be featured in the Loop podcast?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I mean, you got
win.
That's a pretty big feat. I mean, we started late or early 2020, right? Was when
March 1st, 2020.
2.5 years to have 50,000 downloads is, that's obviously the big guys. That's a daily show download. But for us doing what we do with other jobs to have as well, it's a really cool feat to hit that. So
we used to talk about if the old way we used to communicate was you'd have a community presentation. Okay, we're going to invite everyone over to
have a town hall meeting.
Come to the community room and we'll give this presentation. And anywhere from 20 to 40 people would show up, and you go, oh, it was a huge success.
Yeah.
And then if newspaper came, oh, that's even better. They're going to cover the story. Okay, so we presented information to 20 to 40 people. Then it was written in the newspaper, maybe, or maybe it wasn't covered. Now we are able to have these conversations, these presentations in real time, and it be digested by hundreds more people.
Yeah.
At a time. And I'm super happy with that. I go, if our old gold standard was 20 to 40, if we reached 20 to 40 people, we did our job. And now we're reaching hundreds on each episode. And then with all the other ways that we talk, the amount of people that we reach and touch and provide information to is huge.
Oh, yeah.
and your audience is going to grow. And I would think that the print copy is going to grow because you guys tease back the stories.
Oh, yeah.
In the newscast. So if you want a deeper dive in the story, go pick up the paper at one of the local businesses that's carrying it for free.
Yeah.
So that's another thing some people don't realize is the Loop newspaper is a free to the consumer paper.
Absolutely.
You know, it's advertising driven. Obviously, that's where the revenue is, but you need people to pick it up. You need people to recognize the content, the advertisers, and the support from the community. And you guys do a great job of putting all the community events and allowing people to contribute pieces to the biweekly or the bi-month, whatever, every 2 weeks when it comes out. Yeah. So it truly is a community paper, but it's filled with news and information.
And we have really great contributors. We have some people talking about when they were back in sports and
yeah,
really.
Oh yeah,
guy. We have someone like that.
We do.
Yeah, and when he remembers to write.
Now I wasn't going to say anything.
Oh man, I get confused on deadlines because it's a every other week deal, and I'm like, oh wait, hold on, I'm off. Yeah, I totally messed that up. That's on me.
Well, Nick, is there anything else that we want to talk about the In the Loop podcast?
I think that's just about everything. We push our Spotify a lot, so if you subscribe on Spotify, well, I'll be a happy camper.
Excellent. Cool. Okay, so folks, In the Loop podcast, it's a part of the communication efforts from the Loop community newspaper, the things that they're doing they've got a digital version. What's the website?
Oh, theloopnewspaper.com.
Theloopnewspaper.com. Are you going to have is there a link to the podcast on the digital version of the
we haven't pushed the podcast at all because we were in toe stubbing territory, but next so we're
coming soon.
It's coming soon.
Okay, very good.
By the time you guys post it, it should probably be on there.
And if you'd like any information, you can reach out to us at media@tehachapicityhall.com. We'll get information to Nick, or please follow their podcast and what they're doing, because it's very cool that we've got multiple sources of information in this realm. I'm excited about it.
It's totally cool as long as ours stays the best. If they get better than us, I'm going to have a problem. I'm just letting you know right now. It's not going to happen again if Nick gets better than us. Just letting you know.
I'll be in trouble.
Nick has featured us in a couple of the first podcasts. I appreciate
the
courtesy, just the kind of the acknowledgement, and it's, I like it.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I just love the fact that we've got a newscast. So congratulations.
Thank
and
you.
We wish you much luck with which direction it goes.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
All right, folks. Again, media@tehachapicityhall.com. Corey, thanks for stopping in.
All right.
And we'll catch you again soon here on Tehachapod.
Tehachapod is a conversation about Tehachapi designed for the people who live here or who would like to know more about this mountaintop community. If you have a question you would like answered, email media@tehachapicityhall.com. We will try to answer it on a future episode of Tehachapod.